This is Bandicite Podcast number 1 with Sebastian Krempel and me, Gereon Hermkes. Good evening, Krempel.
Good evening.
If you cannot Scrum, you cannot scale. This is something, that's a quote actually from Dr. Jeff Sutherland, co-creator of Scrum, and also the inventor of Scrum at Scale. And this is something that I think is very much true. And the idea behind it is that if you want to scale a Scrum implementation, and scaling means that for those who don't know, if you have one team, you can work according to Scrum, but as soon as you add more teams, you need to find you're scaling and you need to find a solution for that, because that is a higher level of operation of difficulty where you'll need to do something about it. And the reality is that a lot of people scale unwittingly. So what they do is they have heard of Scrum, they implement Scrum for one team, and it works great. They might not even do it perfectly. Actually, it's very unlikely that they even do it at a high level, but even bad Scrum works. And so they get infected, they get the bug, and then they want to have more teams, right? So they start up the next team, and that also works pretty good. But then they keep adding teams, and suddenly the total productivity of those teams is starting to go down, and actually it might go into negative territory, right? And so this is something that happens a lot, and this is when people will start to find a solution for their scaling. And with Scrum at Scale, which in my mind is the best scaling framework there is for Scrum, and full disclosure, I'm a Scrum at Scale trainer, so obviously I'm somewhat partial to this. So in Scrum at Scale, one of the main points is to actually make sure that the single teams that are in this scaling framework together, that they are actually doing proper Scrum. So they are not like at a low level maturity of doing Scrum. They need to perform really good Scrum at the team level for the scaling to work. Because otherwise what you're doing is you're just scaling your inability to deliver. Or as I like to say it, shit doesn't scale, right? So you have a bad Scrum implementation, and then you try to scale it and you're just blowing everything up. And this happens all the time, actually.
It's like everywhere in I don't know, production or techniques or whatever. If you have shit in, then you get shit out,
yes,
right?
Exactly. Yes, and the scaling just magnifies all the little problems that you have at base level. So in order to scale, you need to be able to Scrum, and I think Dr. Sutherland is completely right about that. This is a very important point and something we try to hammer into people when we have the Scrum at Scale training. But I also wonder if there's a corollary to this, and it's actually the inversion, meaning if you can't scale, you can't Scrum. Meaning, at this point of time, so Scrum has been around for a while, and even the large corporations are catching on that this is something good and this is not some new trend or some fad. This is actually something that works and that they want to implement. So it's not just like a small company with 5 to 6 people, let's say, and they can just get away with basic Scrum, with team level Scrum. They actually, for them to have an effect, it needs to be a scaled implementation, right? And so my question is, if you just know basic Scrum, team level Scrum, can you actually make it work? Or is it necessary from an early point on to know how to scale? And this is kind of counterintuitive, right? Because if you know how to Scrum, you know how to Scrum. But my question is, has the game changed to a degree because of the kind of companies that are accepting Scrum, that actually maybe not in your first class, the first class should be on Scrum, and Dr. Sutherland is absolutely right, you should become a good Scrum Master just for one team before you do anything else, because otherwise you won't scale. But my question is, do you need to know kind of which direction the scaling is going and what the changing requirements of you are, for example, as a Scrum Master, so that you can actually do your job if you're in a scaled environment? And I think that holds true. I think actually there's a dichotomy in here, even though both of them are opposing to a degree, both hold true. So yeah, if you can't Scrum, you can't scale. But if you can't scale, you can't really Scrum anymore. And I think that's a change, that's a shift that a lot of people haven't realized yet. And they are doing basic Scrum, they are unwittingly scaling, and they're running into really big problems. And they actually need a scaling framework in order to do their job, because otherwise they're just going to run into the problems.
True.
All right. Any thoughts on if
Scrum?
you can scale?
Scrum scale?
You can Scrum.
No, not really. But I think the most teams are scaling with not tight Scrum in the first place. So they start with I don't know whatever, and then they are messing up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bad Scrum is everywhere. And what is also funny is that people are in such a rush to scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they think that's actually a good thing. But before you scale, you should actually focus on the team, because if you have just fewer teams who are running much more efficiently, that's much cheaper and much more efficient than starting to add teams. No matter how you do that, but even if you know how to add teams, the best way is to get the Scrum and the teams right first. That's much more efficient.
Yeah. And I think there's another problem, I don't know, but most of the time there's a coach or a Scrum Master who's trained well, I don't know, but the rest of the team is not really trained. So they start to scale, or they start Scrum with a trainer as a Scrum Master, something like this, and the rest of the team is, I don't know, unknown people in a Scrum team.
Yes, absolutely. All right, good. So, nothing changes until you do, but the good news is you're ready. Check.